Hey guys, welcome back to Fairycroft House. I'm going to show you the live setup that we've got for our special guest later this afternoon, which is Mr. James White. I'm going to talk to you quickly about the microphones, how the audio interface works, running into my laptop, running our recording software, Pro Tools, which is capturing all the audio. So as you can see, I'm on the temporary stage here, surrounded by our microphones. I'm just going to explain to you what I've got and why I've set them up this way. So first off, we'll start on my right. This is where the harmonica player is going to be. So with the harmonica players, they're quite loud and very harsh instruments. So you want a nice dynamic mic that can capture it well. Up front and centre, this is where James White will be. You can see I've got two pencil condensers either side and one large diaphragm condenser microphone. These two microphones here and here are going to be used to capture the sound of his guitar that he's playing. We'll also be running a jack out the back of his guitar into a DI box to capture the natural sound in the inside of the guitar. Now the reason we've positioned the vocal microphone like this at a slight angle, looking up, James is a bit taller than me, so if you imagine I'm up there. The reason we've got it up is because the perfect place would be in front of his face, but when we're filming stuff, it doesn't look very good. So you have to make a balance between what looks good and what sounds good, and this is what we've gone for. Over on my left, you can see two microphones down at the bottom here. This is where Mr. Dorrington will be playing the cajon, which is a small box drum that you play. One at the back capturing the sound hole to capture all the low sounds of the frequency, mimicking the kick drum, and one at the front to capture the high-end taps, which can be the hi-hat and the snare. So the microphones, they're connected to this, which is our audio interface. They're connected through XLR cables. What the audio interface does, it converts analog signals, which the microphones pick up, into digital signals that the computer can then read. So each one has their own input. So as you can see, this is an 8-channel one. On each of those channels you have a gain setting, and the gain pretty much allows you to let more or less of the signal through. You want to make sure you have a good level, but you don't want too much and you don't want too little. So what happens then is the audio interface sends the signals through into the computer, and that's where we record it with Pro Tools. Welcome back to Fairycroft House. We've shown you how to set up the live recording, and we've invited some wonderful guests. We've got PPS, Mr. Lee Dorrington, and the wonderful James White.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak. My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little weak. I put the two into bed, but the other one has run away. I try and shake it off, but I guess it's just here to stay. It's a long road to hike, but what choice do I have? And the ghost that I carry here says, don't look back.
Hey guys, welcome back. As you can see, I'm now back in the studio. We've finished our session out in the garden with James White, and I'm now going to break down how I would go approaching this mix. Now it is recorded live, so it's not going to be a perfect studio recording, so it takes a different workflow to go through, but the basics that I'll be doing here will be incredibly similar to what you'd go through with the basics of a recorded piece of music in the studio. Okay, so let's dive in. I made the sessions that started as a bit of a mess and it looks very plain, because that's one of the first things I always do when I get a new session, whether I've recorded it myself or someone else has recorded it and I'm just mixing it. So I'm going to start with the colour codes and the naming of the tracks. Now as I've done the session, you can see it's all named correctly. So all the audio files are named nicely here, and we've got our sections on both sides of the screen. You can see it says vocals, harmonica, GTR, which I shorten for guitar. You've got body, neck, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just going to organise and colour code, so I make sure it's a simpler way of seeing everything. So I'm going to start with that now. So for me, when I start with a session, I usually have a certain way I like it mapped out. The drums, for me, in this case, it's the little cajon. They're always red and they're always at the top of my session. So I work from the drums down. I then have the drums. I then would have the bass, if there's any bass, or some keyboards and lower end synthesizers, whatever it's going to be. We don't have that. Next for me, I would get the guitar, so I'm just going to drag those up. I then have whatever other lead instruments there might be, whether it's a lead guitar, maybe a guitar solo, or a piano lead, whatever it might be. That then goes next, and then our vocals are always, for me, last. So I work down. Start with the drums, guitars, in this case the harmonica, and then the vocals. And that's what I'm working with here, as you can see. Nice and simple. Now, especially with it having it color-coded, it makes it much, much easier to see and much, much easier to know what you're working on. So one of the first things I like to do is create groups. So I organise everything in with itself. So if I highlight these two drums here, then hit Command G, I can then open up the group. So I'm going to call that cajon. You see I was going for drums to start with there, and it tells you what is currently in the group here, around on this side, and I just want the cajon, the kick, and the snare. So I've created a group. That means now whatever I do in the edit window to them means that they're linked together, so they'll work together. Also with the mix, you can see on the right hand side of the screen, as I bring one up or one down, they move together with each other. That's easy enough, we can turn that on and off how you want. So I'm going to do the same now with the rest of the guitars. And as it's just, we've got vocals and harmonicas left, they're individual on their own, I don't feel the need to put them into groups at the moment. So you can see on the left here, we're working with the cajons and the guitars in our groups. It's nice because we can quickly and easily turn those off with the shortcut Command-Shift-G. Turns them on and off on the keyboard. So the first thing I want to do, I'm going to have a listen to it, see what it sounds like, so I know, so I can get some ideas in my head of how I want the production to go. And that's where I always start. So firstly, now that I've got the track organised, it's colour-coded, I've got my groups organised, I'm going to have a listen through to it now to make sure I know how it all sounds and where I think I want to take it. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a listen back to the track, because I only heard it through headphones when I was recording out there. I made sure everything was recorded nicely and was sounding good, but I just want to get another feel of the track listening through these speakers in the studio.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is good.
So I've just listened to the whole track and I've got a rough idea of what I want to do. Now the drums, the cajon is going to take up quite a bit of the low end, but as we have no bass, I want to keep the guitar sounding quite full. So I don't want to thin it out to make room for the bass because we don't have a bass. So I'm going to try and keep the guitar quite full sounding. The harmonica, we're going to sit nicely on top, as that's a nice little lead part that counterplays in between the vocals and the rest of the instrumentation with the guitar and the cajon. So we'll leave that quite high up in the mix, and the same again with the vocals. Leave that quite high, nice and up front, everything else. So I'm going to start by looking at our drums. So what I'm going to do is just highlight a small section quickly. So that will now play on repeat. I've got some shortcuts set up so it fits to the window, so we can see here. Oh, I didn't want to move that. Let's highlight that there. So I can click play, and now it will repeat, and I can have a listen. So as you can hear there, we've got a lot of the boom of the sort of the low end of the cajon, which is in this file on the top here, or it's highlighting both. This file on the top here, which is the kick, which gets us the real boost. So if we just listen to that, getting a lot of the low end from that, which is good because we want that there. And then on the snare, we get much more of the top, where it's playing similar to a hi-hat pattern with the snare as well. So what I'm going to start with, and what I start everything with, is subtractive EQ. So subtractive EQ basically takes away all the noise that you don't want from the sound. So if we get the kick up here, again, highlight that section, make that fit the window so we can see exactly what we're looking at. Move over here and open up a 7-band EQ. Now I'm going to be doing this session with just the presets that are built into Pro Tools. So you won't see any plugins or anything else that you have to get. All that I'm going to be using is the built-in stuff of Pro Tools. So when I'm setting up the EQ for the subtractive EQ, I want to make sure everything's bell curves. So you can see here on this low filter here, I've made it a bell curve, and the same thing I'm going to do here on the high filter. I'm going to make it a bell curve rather than a shelf. And I'm also going to give them very high Q values, so they're very thin, precise curves. What I then do is I boost a curve, pick it up, and sweep through and listen to see if there's any resonances or bits of the frequency spectrum that I don't like. So let's start with that. So you can hear there, that's the real sine boosty tone that we have of the kick drum. So I don't want to get rid of that, otherwise we'll lose a lot of the presence of it. So if I take this out, we lose a lot of the low presence of it. So sort of those whistling tones you can hear there that I've boosted up, trying to get rid of. So then what we can do as well, I'll turn this up a little bit for you. We can listen to the A-B of it with the EQ and without the EQ. So I'm going to bypass it. So you've got a much bigger, sort of, it's quite boxy sounding. Take this out, we're going to clean it up a little bit, get rid of those nasty resonances, and then we'll move on. So the next thing I'm going to do is do subtractive EQ on the other drum now in exactly the same manner. So one of the things I always like to do as well is make sure that they're sounding good together stage by stage to make sure what I've done to the EQing. As you can see here, all I've actually done, I had a listen, it's a lovely recording, it sounds great, so I've only actually low cut so we can isolate the lows of the con just in one track, which will be the kick. So I'll solo both of these, we'll have a listen together. So we've got the low end with the kick, and the tapping with the snare. So the kick's actually a bit much, let's bring it down a little bit just while we're listening. Yeah, EQ sounds nice and clean. The next thing I want to do is put a little bit of compression on it. So we're going to open up, again, the built-in Pro Tools compressor. The built-in Pro Tools compressor, because I'm only going to be using Pro Tools stuff. Now with drums, you want a nice fast attack and a long release. Let's try something like this. I don't want to compress it too hard, so maybe 4.4 to 1. Bring down the threshold a smidgen, and let's see. Oh, it's a bit way too much threshold. Let's bring that back. So you can see when it's really peaking there, I'm only taking maybe a max 4, maybe compressing it by max by 4 dB on the real peak. So I'm really keeping the dynamics there within it. And I'm going to do a very similar thing on the snare. Again, we want a fast attack, long release, and we'll bring up the threshold because we know that's actually quite high. So let's have unsolo the kick. So compressing it a bit much there. Let's bring this threshold up a little. So yeah, it's just really focusing on those real peaks. Maybe that's a bit much there. Let's take it up a little bit. So I just want to flatten off those top ones to bring it all together a little bit. So now we've done that, I'm going to add additive EQ. So the idea being you have your subtractive, your compression, then your additive EQ. And what those two do, the subtractive and the first compression, is that basically focus in all the sounds that you want to then affect. So with the additive EQ, rather than using very small, precise bell curves, we're going to use some big wider ones. The way I like to think about it is if you're doing your sketch, so you're using a fine thin pencil, sketching everything out before you do your painting, and then you can get nice big brush strokes which really add the colour, which is what the additive EQ does. So let's now have a listen to this kick and see what we can do. So it's quite boxy around that midsection. That's something I'm going to want to bring out here. But I'm quite happy with all those highs in there as well, so I'm going to keep the high frequencies. Let's see how, if we add, so we just added another EQ, we're going to do as the general EQ for the additive EQ for the snare. So we're going to have a look at that now. As you can see, we've got play on here. Again, it's going to be nice big brush strokes. So I really want to emphasize that tap, which is acting as a snare. That's nicely emphasized and that's working well. I just want to bring up the more subtle ones, which will be a bit in the higher frequencies. So let's have a listen to see where they are. So this is again just highlighting the sound of it. So with that, we've got a nice big thump of the cajon being the kick, and then the high taps of the hi-hats. We'll listen to those together now with all the EQs on. I've actually changed my mind after listening to those together. I didn't like the high frequencies coming through as much as they were on the cajon, on the kick side. So as you can see here, I've just dipped the high frequencies in, and I think it sounds a lot better. And I'm nicely happy. I've leveled them off. As you can see, the cons are quite a bit, the kick is quite a bit quieter than the snare there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to reactivate those groups, and that means now that they'll always stay that little bit away from each other. So we get that one back near enough 0. Yeah, that'll do somewhere there. It's nice work together. So next up, I'm going to have a look at the guitar and the guitar body. I'm going to show you the 3 different mics that we've got running on our guitar here. So we have was using 2 mics on the body and was taking 1 DI. As you can see, guitar body, guitar neck, and guitar DI. So if I zoom in on a section like this, so that's what we're picking up from the body. You can see on the neck there, it's picking up much more the sound of the strings and the fingers and the pick being moved across. And then if we have a look at the DI, so we've got quite a lot of low prints there, but also we can really hear that pick being worked across the strings. I'm probably going to use a combination of all 3, to be honest, and to give the whole track some more width. So I'll be panning probably the body left, the neck a bit to the right, and having the guitar DI set up a little bit lower in the middle. So one of the things I'm going to do there is chuck the guitar DI in the middle. So when I'm looking at the panning, I can see how it works. So I'll solo all these together, move over to this screen, do a little bit of panning, and we'll solo that and see what we can get.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak. My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little bleak. I'll put the 2 into that.
So one of the things I think I'm noticing here is that the guitar DI is actually out of phase with the guitar body, because you can't really hear it unless I push it massively. And you see how we're working with it, it's sounding quite thin, the guitar's sounding quite thin. That means they're not really in phase with each other. So if I add a plugin, which is, I think the trim plugin in Pro Tools, again another built-in. This has got, see in this little top corner here, this little button here, this is called phase invert. So it inverts the phase of the guitars. So if we have a listen now.
Yeah, sorry.
Highlight section again.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak.
We got a much fuller sounding guitar there compared to how it was before. So if I turn this on and off, you'll be able to hear those phase differences.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak. My hair's a little.
With it phase inverted, it's much fuller. You hear much more of the low end. It's mixing together much nicer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through now and do exactly the same as I did on the Cajon. I'm going to do the subtractive EQ, compression, and then additive EQ, and I'll bring you back once that's all done. So now what I've done is I've added the subtractive EQ, compression, and additive EQ all to the guitars that we've got here, and I've run into a little bit of a problem. Now the problem is on the guitar neck. If I solo this here and show you,
Don't look back.
there's a lot of vocals coming through this, and it's out of phase with the vocals. So what it does, it makes it sound a lot thinner. So we solo that and the vocals.
Don't look back.
The guitars sound really thin and nasty, and the vocals have this very low boomy presence, which they don't need, compared to the vocals on their own.
Don't look back.
Much nicer.
Don't look back.
You can also see the vocals are much more isolated from the guitar. So I think I'm actually going to get rid of the guitar neck recording entirely. Just get that muted, get that out of the way, and work with just the guitar DI and the guitar body. Now the reason I found this is because whenever you're adding stuff on, I always check. Now the reason I found this is whenever I'm adding bits to the mix and I'm doing the EQing on the compressing, I always check how it sounds overall as well. You're not just focused on how it sounds on its own, its isolated sound. You want to make sure it sounds good in the general scheme of things throughout the whole mix. So what I do is I solo stuff in, I then unsolo it, listen to it with everything else and see. So what I then do is I solo stuff, listen to the isolated sound, take it out of the isolation and listen to it in the context of the mix. So that's what I've been doing, and that's where I found that problem. So it's a good job that I did that. So I'll show you the guitars here. This is what they sound like on their own. As you can see, I've panned them a little bit left and right here. You can still hear a little bit of the vocals in the guitar, but you can get away with it. At the end of the day, it is a live recording, and we did record it outside, so it's very hard to get everything isolated from each other. So that's how the guitars sound again. Check them, add the drums in. So yeah, the guitars are now sounding nice together. It's working with the bass, and I add the vocals in, although I haven't done anything to them, just to double check in the context of the mix how it all works.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak. My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little weak. I put the two into bed,
and it all sits nicely together. So as you can see, I've added the stuff to the vocal chain now. I've got the subtractive EQ, compression and additive EQ. Again, very, very simple. What you'll notice though is the sound that has changed. So what I've tried to do is get rid of everything else, and the background of the guitar, you can hear some of the cajon in there, because I was using a large diaphragm mic which picks up a lot of sound around it, to try and really isolate the vocals from it. Now, one of the things I could have done with this is gating, and gating really would have isolated the vocals, but I didn't. I still wanted to keep it a live performance. You could still hear the fact that it was live in there. So if I quickly just turn all the vocals off, we'll have a quick listen to how the vocals sound on their own, and then I'll add my bits. I'll show you what I've done. I like that.
my hair's a little longer, but my future is a little bleak.
So you can hear a lot of the kick of the cajon in there, lots and lots of the guitar, which is quite busy. So I tried to thin that all down and just focus and isolate the vocals. So what I'll do is I'll add it bit by bit what I've done.
My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little bleak.
So that's to thin it.
I put two into bed, but the other
Some
one
light
has
compression.
run away. I try and shake it off, but again.
And now you can see there, just by doing that, the vocals sit way above everything else in the mix. They sit above the guitars, above everything else, and that's just what we picked up through the vocal microphone. So that's where we start. Again, I've double checked it, so I've soloed the guitars with it.
My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little bleak. I put two into bed.
And it sounds good. It sounds nice together. Add in the cajon.
My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little bleak. I put.
It's all fine, it's all sounding good together. So the last piece of the puzzle here is now the harmonica. So let's get a solo on that and let's have a listen through and see what we can do. So there's not a lot of bleed coming through in these places, which is good, nice to be able to work with. You can mainly hear the pattern of the cajon in there. So I don't know how much I'm going to do to this. I'll probably do the same. probably this was just going to use some light compression and a bit of additive EQ. So if I add the compressor, bit of attack, short release for this, shut it down. So I just want to flatten those big peaks because I want to keep that dynamic, the dynamic playing that he's got in there. So yeah, let's get that EQ 7 band up. A lot of nice stuff in the low mids. So I'm going to take out that little mid section because that's where the boxiness of it is. Not the nice harshness, but the boxiness that makes it sound a little bit small. And then if we bring these in something here. And again, I want to double check how this sits in the track with everything else. So I put it in with some of the guitar.
Stronger, but my body is a little weak. My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little bleak.
It sits in, it's fine, it's very forward. So next up is one of my favourite parts. We're adding all the effects and it really helps bring the track together and make everything fit a bit more, and then we do the final level mix and see if there's any automation that we need to add. And all I'm going to do, keep it very simple, I'm going to have one delay track and one reverb track. So I'm going to create two new stereo aux inputs, so let's create those at the end here. So now we've organised that, you can see we've got our two new auxiliaries, so I'm going to call one of them delay and the next one reverb. Now these, I don't need to go into any more description than that because I know these are going to be general. I'm going to set their bus inputs as delay as 1, 2, and the reverb as 3, 4, so we can send stuff as and when we want. So some of the main stuff we want to be doing will be the vocals and everything else. But first let's get our delays. So multi-channel plugins, delays, mod delay 3, or yeah, let's go mod delay 3. Again, this is a built-in Pro Tools one, and multi-channel reverb, we'll use the Deverb, which is the built-in Pro Tools one again. So we'll just have those on the basic settings at the moment. We'll look into those in a bit. What I'm going to do now is just start sending some stuff that I know I'm going to want to the channels. For example, most things I'm going to send to the reverb, so I'm just going to copy these buses over here. Harmonica and vocals like that. That's all going to the reverb. I might send a bit of guitar to the delay track, a bit of the harmonica and a bit of the vocals. And then we can start with that and we'll see what we're working with. So I'm going to solo safe the two tracks. So whatever we solo, they'll be soloed with the tracks that we're soloing, so we can hear the effects whilst we're playing around with it. So we look at the vocals, for example. Find a bit where the vocals are in.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak.
So that's sending to the delay, which for the moment we'll leave neutral because I want to sort that out. I want to send some to the reverb, and let's have a listen.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak.
So again, that sounds very unnatural. They're in a large ambient room. They're in a large hall here, as you can see. So what I'll probably want to do is put it as a medium one, increase the pre-delay a little bit, not massively. Come on, where are we going? Yeah, about 4, 5. Let's go medium room 2 with a little bit of pre-delay.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak. My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little bleak. I put 2 into bed, but the other one has run away.
So that's nice. It's subtle. It just gives a bit more, but it doesn't sound like they're too much in a room. It sounds like they're in a space rather than tucked away in a room or out in a big hall. One thing a lot of people don't do as well when they're starting out doing mixing and audio stuff is actually processing your effects channels, so like your reverb and stuff. So I always love an EQ on the effects channels. I like to get rid of the low end on it. So I have quite a harsh low cut up to about 200, maybe 3 in this, we'll see. See what that sounds like.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak.
So it gets rid of those lows, and then I boost a little bit the highs or either the high mids.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body...
See, that's a bit too bright for me, so I'll probably boost this here.
Well, my mind is stronger.
Then that just gives it a bit more presence in where those vocals and guitars will be coming through. So process that. Now let's figure out the levels of the other stuff.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak. My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little weak. I put 2 into bed, but the other one has run away. I try and shake it off, but I guess it's just here to stay. It's a long road to hike, but what choice do I have? And the ghost that I carry here says, don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak. My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little weak. I put 2 into bed, but the other one has run away. I try and shake it off, but I guess it's just here to stay. It's a long road to hike, but what choice do I have? And the ghost that I carry here says, don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. Well, my mind is stronger, but
So the reverb there is sounding nice. Let me show you with an A and a B so you can hear it with and without.
well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak. My hair's a little longer, but my future is a...
It just helps sit everything together, makes it all sound like it's coming from one space. Again, it is subtle, it's not too in your face because it's a live recording. We want it to, as if it could be real, so we're sort of faking it. A bit of audio magic, so to speak.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak. My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little bleak.
I think I want some more compression on the on this harmonica here because
Well, my mind,
it's just jumping around a bit too much.
well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak. My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little bleak. I put 2 into bed.
It's sitting a bit flatter there, it's fitting in the mix a bit nicer. Let's have a look at this delay and see what we're doing here. So I go 1, 2, send some of the vocals, solo the vocals, and let's see what we can do with this delay. Don't know if we're going to use it or not, it might just be subtle because it helps give stuff a bit more space in the mix. If you want to bring up the vocals a bit more, bring up the harmonica a bit more maybe, that's a good way where we can add it. Maybe we'll use it on the guitars, I'm not sure. But let's figure out what sort of delay we want first.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is up.
We're not going to have one like that.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is up. Well,
a little slap back delay is similar to that, might be nice. A slap spread.
well, my mind is stronger, but my...
So you see that it's giving the vocals a lot more space. I know it's turned up quite heavily, but...
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak.
If we put it in context,
My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little bleak. I put the two into bed, but the other one has run away. I try and shake it off, but I guess it's just here to stay.
again, we're not going to spend hours on this because it's a live sound. We don't want to go in, edit every little piece. Don't want to do any sort of real auto-tune because it takes away again from it being live. So we're just doing a very basic, very easy, very quick little mix down of this.
Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. I said you don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back.
I think I might send a little bit of harmonica to the delay as well, just to give it a bit more room.
Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. I said you don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back.
Just want to compress that harmonica more because there's a lot of dynamics in this last bit and we was losing it a bit in the mix there. So another thing I've done as well is I've given a bit more space to the mix by using the panning. So I've put the harmonica off to the left and the cajon off to the right a little bit. Still the low end and the kick is coming through the centre, but the taps of the snare are coming out on the right hand side. This will also help in the video as well when you're looking at them to place where everything is, because as you'll see in the video, the harmonica is sitting over on the left, James White is in the centre, and the cajon player is on the right hand side as you're looking at it. And doing that, it gives a bit more space for everything and for James's vocals to sit nicely in the middle. So let's just have another listen and see if we want any more tweaks made.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak. My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little bleak. I put the two into bed, but the other one has run away. I try and shake it off, but I guess it's just here to stay. It's a long road to hike, but what choice do I have? And the ghost that I carry here says, don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't Don't look back.
So yeah, I'm very happy with how that's turned out. It still sounds like a live recording, which is the whole purpose of this. You don't want to make it sound like it's been done in the studio. They were playing outside in a garden, which is why you can hear bits of the wind at time and why there's a few mistakes, this, that and the other. But that's the fun of the live recording. All I've done, I've cleaned the audio a bit, added a bit of effects and gave it a very subtle, as you can see on the right hand screen, a very subtle level balance. There's not a whole lot of production gone into this, and that's I think the best way it could have been organised, because if you put too much into it, it would start sounding less and less like a live setting. So I hope you enjoyed it.
Well, my mind is stronger, but my body is a little weak. My hair's a little longer, but my future is a little weak. I put two into bed, but the other one has run away. I try and shake it off, but I guess it's just here to stay. It's a long road to hack, but what choice do I have? And the ghost that I carry here says, don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. I see it and I wonder, but the news still stays the same. Go aside for a wonder, but the people drive me insane. Drag my feet across the ground, cause the problems won't go away. Hear the moaning from the town as the people go about their day. It's a long road to hack, but what choice do I have? And the ghost that I carry here says, don't look back. 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 I said you don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look. Don't look back.
So thank you very much.